Welcome everyone to this session on inclusion and accessibility, ambassadors beyond language. I want to remind everyone that we have a chat pod and you can introduce yourselves, say where you're from. You can also just talk to each other, but we do have a different pod, a little tab up there that says Q&A. So please prepare your questions during the talk and we'll address them at the end of the session. Thank you very much. It is my pleasure to introduce Allison McDougall. Encouraging inclusion has been a hallmark of Allison's 20 plus year career in the localization industry, where she has helped to provide complex language solutions in an accessible, inclusive way for technology, pharmaceuticals, medical devices, and consumer companies. Allison has served in leadership with some top 5 LSPs and is currently Executive Vice President at G3 Translate, which is a woman-owned WBENC certified company, partnering with companies to support purpose-driven diversity and inclusion missions. Outside her work in the language industry, services industry, she's passionate about helping others live their best lives through a strategic children's literacy initiative in Colorado, funding a 5-year international languages scholarship at her undergraduate alma mater, the University of Illinois, or her strategic affiliation with the 5,000-member Women in Localization, which she led as global president in 2017 and remains an advisor today. Allison, please take the floor.
Janice, thank you so much. That was wonderful. So honored to be here. Any day that I get to collaborate with Janice and GALA is a fabulous day indeed. So thank you so much for being here. I'm going to go ahead and share the presentation that I've prepared for today. So just one moment, please. And I'm putting that into presentation mode. Janice, if you would just be ever so kind as to confirm that you can see this,
No.
That would be great.
Cannot, no, not yet.
Oh, cannot. Okay, one moment. Let me just reshare. Okay, now it's thinking. There we go.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, and one more confirmation.
Looks good.
All right, well, let's get this off to a great start. So who needs accessibility? It's an inclusive design practice that keeps people with disabilities in mind. For today's session, we'll be focusing on the digital parts of this, which could be anything from websites to desktop applications to voice over IP to kiosks, mobile apps, anything electronic, as opposed to things like handicap ramps or parking. Oops, hang on just a second. Let me just back up just a little bit. We are going to go ahead and kick off with a poll. Jessica? Are we seeing the poll?
Yes, now we see it.
Okay. What does digital accessibility mean to you? And there are 4 choices there. Accessibility means that a website doesn't need a paid login. Perhaps it means that accessibility and a website is available in 2 or more languages. Perhaps it's that a website has a lot of pictures and minimal text. Or perhaps it is that a website can be easily navigated and understood by anyone, regardless of language or physical impairment. I'm going to stop sharing so we can see the results here. Okay, let's go ahead and give it just a few more seconds and we can close the poll. Jessica, are we seeing the results?
Yeah, yes, we are.
Okay, I am not seeing the results on my side.
Oh, okay. Well, your last point about a website can be easily navigated and understood by anyone, it received all the votes.
Okay, well, hopefully it wasn't too obvious. So let's go ahead and continue. So again, who needs accessibility? People, all people, everyone. At G3, we're trying to design with everyone in mind, regardless of any disability they may have. Sometimes it's easy to think about disability or accessibility as just linking or connecting a certain group, such as people who are blind. That tends to be a common one. What is accessibility? Oh, it's when you add alt text for images for the blind. And yes, while that's correct, it's much, much more than that. So we're trying to design for truly everyone. The movement can also be called universal design, which happens to be more inclusive. So let's touch on a few of the common disability and accessibility solutions. So visual, this includes things like color blindness and people who do not rely on color. Blindness, these folks tend to use a lot of screen readers and or braille displays. Everything must have a text equivalent. Dyslexia, also use assistive technology for text. And for this, it's best to avoid the use of italics or fonts with serifs. There are also people with low or partial vision, and screens must be able to magnify, which are generally okay with responsive design. Auditory, this includes things like deafness and hard of hearing. And this is accomplished mostly through closed captioning on videos. Mobility, flexibility, and body structure disabilities. This includes things like manual dexterity and fine motor control, ambulation, muscle fatigue, body size, and body shape and form. A wide variety of situations can be included here, but a common theme is that these populations probably will be unable to use a mouse. They'll either use a keyboard or have some innovative device that emulates a keyboard. The SIP Puff device that I show here gives 3 inputs, SIP, Puff, and no input, which hooks up to a keyboard software and allows people to move through the keys and make their desired selections. Also note that sometimes people can still use a standard keyboard mouse setup, but it might be difficult. It might be hard enough to have control, say, to click a small checkbox. Cognitive disabilities include intellectual, memory, reading, math comprehension, attention deficit disorder, learning, dyslexia, language, and/or autism. Again, many types of conditions. A general approach here is to make sure the content is straightforward. Minimalist design helps a lot here, as does following standard design conventions. Keep the reading level as basic as possible and appropriate for the content. Break up the content into multiple paragraphs, and as we've been doing in localization for a number of years, avoiding jargon when and where possible. It's also useful to give people multiple ways of consuming information, such as multiple links or pathways to a page, or multiple ways of describing data, such as including a pie chart or a data table or a textual summary. Speech disabilities include no speech and articulation. I would recommend providing an option for chat or texting instead of just sole phone support. Seizure disabilities can include photosensitivity and general seizure disorders. Thankfully, most designers have already gotten behind this one, and we don't have much flashing content. The main rule for this one is the rule of 3. No flashes more than 3 times per second. Psychological and psychiatric disabilities can include social, emotional, and/or behavioral. Various disorders can make interacting with technology difficult, and the approaches can be similar to cognitive disabilities. At a high level, companies should try to avoid mental clutter, ensure that tasks are easy to follow and complete, and allow people to stop and pause and continue their work later. This can be anything, and it gets very challenging very quickly. Imagine how difficult it can be with a single disability. Now imagine having to deal with a second while managing the first. Just to give everyone a sense of the prevalence that we're talking about here. According to the CDC, disabilities affect 26% of people, or 61 million people in the United States alone. It's believed to be higher when you include the rest of the world, although reports vary due to privacy laws and people's reluctance to report. Here are the primary disability demographics breakdowns. Again, US specific. Most of the people included here do not necessarily have any impairment when using technology, such as someone in a wheelchair. For the purposes of digital accessibility, we're more interested in the groups of people who would be affected when using technology. The data referenced here is harder to find as most research is done targeting general disability categories and not technology specific. Based on our experience, these numbers look about right, but are likely on the low side because, as I said earlier, people are hesitant to disclose. So physical, these people have difficulty lifting or grasping. They're less likely to use standard input devices like a mouse. Reliance on keyboard controls or custom input devices will be very common for this population. Cognitive includes mental or emotional impairments. These people will be more strongly affected by the content on a site or within a document. Stimulus overload, reading level, moving, auto-playing content are all big issues or challenges for this 6.3% of the population. And vision, any visual impairment, blind, of course, being the most severe. And we're estimating about 0.5% according to current WHO data. But this also includes, as I mentioned earlier, partial vision, low vision, and color blindness. These people often use screen magnification software or screen readers. Jessica, let's go out to the audience for another poll, please. How is your company handling digital accessibility? Choices here, 5 choices. I have no idea, as this isn't something I typically get involved with. My company hasn't started yet, so tell us more. We've had some conversations about it, but have yet to implement anything. We've begun implementing some basic digital accessibility measures or principles. And we've got digital accessibility locked and loaded, but we want to ensure that we have everything covered. Go ahead and take a quick second there to respond. Okay, and once again, can someone please share the results with me? Janice?
Yes, it looks like 50% we've begun implementing the basic digital accessibility measures, and then the one above that, some conversations, there's 25%, and the other 25 is we've got digital accessibility locked and loaded.
Fantastic. Well, there's no time like the present to start implementing some of these measures. And as we know, they go hand in hand. Such a wonderful natural extension to what many of us have dedicated our careers to in the localization space. So before we move on, just a couple of quick notes on etiquette, so we can talk about the people involved without worry or offense. So as I said earlier, this is about people. They are people just like you. And the way that we should approach this is to relax. Talk person to person. Do normal things like elbow bumps or handshakes post-COVID. If you're going to do something to help them, be sure to offer first. If in doubt, just ask. So language, again, person first, disability second. So people with disabilities rather than referring to them as disabled people. Only mention the disability if needed. Most interactions are fine as is, and no need to mention the disability unless it affects what you're doing. So for example, if I have a pie chart that I'm presenting in a meeting and I'm showing it to a group, perhaps I'd have to describe the content if someone isn't able to see it. Disabled and disability are the current best terms to refer to. And avoid older or patronizing terms such as handicapped or crippled or wheelchair bound or special or differently enabled. This is one that I actually hear about a lot in my business. Avoid pity. People with disabilities are not necessarily suffering or inspirational. They're just people. They manage their disability and live it out day by day. Common expressions are fine, and some of the examples that are often used are like, see you later, or I've got to run. These are fine and used by people who might not be able to see or run. There's some subtlety here though. Expressions like, that's dumb, or falls on deaf ears. These can be tricky as they refer to a group in a negative way. Here's another common one that most of us hear quite often. I'm so OCD. These represent disabilities and for some people could easily offend. So again, mindfulness and speaking and thinking before you speak. Ask before helping. Someone who is blind might appreciate having the menu read for them or having an elbow to grab as they cross the busy street, but ask first. Wheelchairs are similar. Think of these as an extension of the person's body. Don't just grab the person and start moving them around. If you bump into them by accident, a simple oops, please excuse me. I think this is a common one. Do not interact with the guide dog. They're on duty. Speak to the person, not the helper. Someone who is deaf or for other reasons has an interpreter or a helper. Don't talk to the person, talk to the person. Don't talk to the interpreter, talk to the person rather. And make the interaction as accessible and inclusive as possible. If you're meeting in a meeting room, be mindful that a person in a wheelchair can join you in the meeting room. Are you meeting online? Can a member who is blind access the video chat application or the document share? So why do we make things accessible? In today's world, universal design is the recommended way to design. Why would a company choose to build a product with only 90% of the population in mind? Fortunately, there's a strong business case for accessibility. And as we talk to companies, there's often a carrot and stick involved. Realistically, the main driver is the stick, fear of lawsuits, which I'll touch on in a few moments. And we try to take a positive approach as much as possible. So there are real positive benefits to accessible technology. And focusing on the benefits is what users care about. In general, an accessible website is a better website. The UI/UX changes involved in making a site accessible benefit everyone. If you have a website that presents data as a pie chart and has the data in a table below and has a write-up about what the data means, then not only does it include people with disabilities, cognitive, multiple ways of presenting info, visual, etc. But in general, people take in and process information differently anyway, and you've just communicated with your entire user population more effectively. Additionally, a digitally accessible website will also rank higher on most search engines. There are lots of features that were invented with accessibility in mind. And most of these are used by the general population today. There's a lot of potential market share if a website is accessible. People with disabilities are the world's largest minority group. And numbers may vary on this, but somewhere between 1 and 2.5 billion people. And as I mentioned, a lot of people have reluctance or hesitancy to self-disclose. This is a spending power somewhere between $6 to $7 trillion globally. There are many types of disabilities, but the one affecting websites are at an estimated 10% of the population. So in addition to these straight numbers, if one company has an accessible website and their competitors don't, they'll gain a lifelong customer and loyal brand advocate. People with disabilities tend to be very loyal, more so than non-disabled people. Many of you may be familiar with the Americans Disability Act, which was established in 1990. It was put into effect to protect the rights of people with disabilities. And the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, more commonly known as WCAG, are a compilation of accessibility guidelines for websites. There are similar guidelines for other regions of the world. For example, in China, they have a law for the protection of persons with disabilities. And this is kind of an extension or a derivative of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, that we have in the United States. Another one in China is the Voluntary Web Accessibility Guide. One in Japan, the Basic Act on the Formation of an Advanced IT Network Society. So this is a movement that is gaining momentum. And the US tends to be very litigation heavy and has a strong legal foundation for accessibility and civil rights in general. The result of this is that there are many lawsuits and companies that are liable and very aware and very interested in accessibility, sometimes for, let's just say, an alternative reason. So how do we accomplish accessibility? I'm going to quickly present a framework that we refer to as POUR, perceivable, text alternatives for non-text content, ensuring captions and other alternatives for multimedia, content that can be presented in different ways, such as I mentioned, pie charts, tables, contextual text summarized, content that is easy to see and consume, the usage of high contrast colors, operable, functionality is available from a keyboard. Users have enough time to read and use the content without it timing out. Content that does not cause seizures or physical reactions. Users can easily navigate, find content, and determine where they are. And as I mentioned earlier, users that can use different input modalities beyond a keyboard. Understandable. The text is readable and understandable. The content appears and operates in predictable ways. And users are helped to avoid and correct mistakes. And finally, R, robust. Ensure that content is compatible with current and future user tools. For web content, check against all browsers and advanced technologies. And with that, Janice, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Again, such an honor. Thank you.
This is such an important topic, and I'm so glad that you presented about it and gave us solutions as well. Right now, while we go to the Q&A, we'd like to see Pete's wonderful artwork here of your topic. So if we could pin that, it would be so great if you unshare, and then I think Jessica can go ahead and pin that so we can see the beautiful.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see this too.
Okay. Yeah, I don't
No.
I don't know where I don't think I have access to do that. So
if you unshare, sorry to.
Yeah, you have to unshare. I think.
You unshare,
you are
I can
unshare, right?
share. So
there. Okay. So
Unshare?
Pete can please.
So I can now share. Yeah. Bear with me 2 seconds.
Oh, wonderful.
Oh,
That's fantastic.
Is it there? Okay.
Oops. There we go. That's
Very
perfect.
nice.
Okay. We just love seeing this art. It's so wonderful. Thank you, Pete.
I like how he captured
you.
the POUR framework.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll go to a couple questions here. So we have a couple of them, and one of them from Soren. Regarding the terms used for people with disabilities, are there good sources for these terms across all languages and markets?
That's a great question. And I can certainly follow up after the presentation. But yes, and these continue to evolve, right? I mean, I remember just a few short years ago, differently enabled, if anyone remembers that phrase. And at the time, that was a phrase that was highly encouraged. And now today, this is a phrase that is considered non-politically correct and even borderline offensive. So this is a list that continues to evolve, and I can share this with you after the presentation.
Yeah, having the translation for those, it varies not just by linguistic group, but probably by country and region as well.
Indeed, indeed. And even the very definitions themselves also vary by country.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure there's legal ramifications around all
Mhm.
of that, right? That's
Mhm.
a great point. Why do you think that, sorry, why should the localization community be concerned with digital accessibility?
Yes, I love this question. And as I touched on in my introduction, I think digital accessibility is the perfect and natural extension to what so many of us have been doing in the localization world for years. When we think about language, language at its core is about being inclusive and touching. It's not just the right thing to do, right? I mean, obviously that plays a huge part of it, but it's also about connecting and including your entire total available market, whatever that might be. And as I said, in the US alone, it's believed that 26% of the population struggles with at least one disability. So language, digital accessibility, I think they are a perfect combination and go hand in hand to ensuring that everyone globally can be included in whatever content or whatever meetings that you're sponsoring.
Thank you. I have another question here. Based on your experience, what are some of the best-in-class examples of websites that get digital accessibility right?
Oh, I love this question. And just like so many categories out there today, there are actually categories that award companies for getting this right or getting this as close as right to possible. So I think the BBC.com is one that is definitely worth shooting for. The way that they absolutely feature people first. And they also have a functionality that allows for focus of the content. Additionally, many of us in localization are used to the language selector tab up in the right-hand corner. More and more companies are featuring a digital accessibility tab, mostly over on the left, that allows users to select their disability profile, and then the site will render and take that into account and render that experience in the most useful and productive way based on that profile. So BBC does this very, very well, as does Walmart.com. Walmart.com is excellent as it relates to people with cognitive disabilities. It allows for focus on a product without a lot of noise in the background and along the margins. So Walmart.com, I think, does a really nice job of this. And I think one of the holy grails in terms of this is also Hilton.com. So not just bringing in a lot of the practices that I touched on related to digital accessibility, but also the way they allow people with disabilities to search and filter on accessible rooms according to an accessibility profile. So those are the three that I would mention offhand, Janice.
Well, we're actually really at the end here, but there's a couple of comments here, just not questions, but just great comments I want you to hear. So many people really enjoyed this session. They were looking forward to it. They think it's great content from several people, and very inspiring. Also being paired with the one previous to this, which was about words matter and inclusive terminology. That was a good pairing. I think they went hand in hand very well. So I just wanted to make sure that you saw all the comments that were there was quite a few of them there, just thanking you for such a wonderful and inspiring presentation. And so many things I really didn't know about that accessibility button on the left-hand side. That's amazing. I hope that more companies will incorporate that into their websites. So thank you once again for such a great presentation. And I think we're at the close now. So Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you so much, everyone. It was an honor, and I'd love to connect with you afterward.
Oh, do you have a slide that said how to connect?